Blessings in Jesus' name. This video is about spiritual warfare. Question: does it matter what anybody thinks about you? You see, when you ask this question, it can sound flippant, as though you don't care. But that's not the question. Does it matter what anybody thinks about you? What do I mean by matter? Should you allow it to harm you what other people think about you? No. Does it matter what people think about you? No. Does it matter what people see you doing? Yes. Why? So that you're putting a show on for men? No. So that your conduct is seen to be obedient to the one that it does matter what he thinks about you. It only matters what one thinks about you, because he's your life. Not even demons care what you think about them, unless they're trying to manipulate your behaviour. They don't have genuine reason for your attention. God does. Let that sink in. They don't have any genuine reason for your attention. Only Jesus does. Your restoration. Does it matter what people think about you? No. Does it matter what a person thinks about you? Yes. Who's that person? The one who holds your eternity. But again, somebody might say, well, that sounds careless, that you don't care about it, what anybody thinks about you. The question I asked was, does it matter? Yeah, it matters to them. Does it matter to you? It should only matter to you if you believe that you can improve their experience by altering your behaviour in a way that wouldn't dissatisfy God. So in other words, we have to conduct ourselves in a way that is acceptable unto God, and whether men accept it or not, it doesn't matter. That's simple, isn't it? Because otherwise your head would be wrecked. Trying to satisfy everybody. That's impossible when the people you're trying to satisfy have different viewpoints on what is satisfying. You have two people in the room, you love them both, but they have different expectations of you which are contrary to each other's. That's an impossible situation for you. You cannot please both and stay true to your obedience to God. But you can do right by both. That's by doing what is pleasing to God. So it's a single-mindedness so that you don't harm anybody, even though they might have different expectations of you. So it doesn't matter what people think about you. It only matters what one person thinks about you. In terms of when we're trying to value something, we're not saying that the sensitivities and the inward experiences of people don't matter to us. But of course they do. That's why instruction and edification come in. That's why it's so important that we preserve the mother-child relationship and continue to educate young mothers on how to be mothers. And that should be the role of women with women. Because women are best qualified to be mothers. Tell your granny how to suck eggs. But at the same time, there's a woman with experience who can help a woman who's relatively inexperienced. Not assuming that she's going to know everything about that woman's experience, because women can have different experiences, but that's why society, God says, needs many guides, because of the varieties of experiences and the diversities within the experiences of different people with experience, so that they can instruct somebody, or be more likely to be able to instruct somebody who has a certain specific peculiarity to their situation, their motherhood situation. So it's very simple. The systems of community which God has instructed are so, if somebody has unrealistic expectations of other people, that other human beings, that our communities can edify those people on what are realistic expectations to have, what expectations should we have as people who are trying to live together harmlessly, what are our governing systems that have been most productive. Well, of course, those are the systems which best reflect what God has commanded men to do. Because God doesn't command men to live in a way that's harmful to other men. He said, love thy neighbour, love thy enemy, which tells us be always in the way of bonding the wound and healing the damage. That's why loving thy enemy overcomes evil. See, when Satan drives a blade, acceptance of the situation and the damage is the first step towards healing. But there has to be an accommodation of others around. Instead of seeing their harm as a weakness to be preyed on, it's a weakness to be prayed about to the Most High. And we should try to help other people when they're disabled or handicapped in any way. That can be mourning, grief. In other words, like bereavement in terms of a woman becoming a widow. And that's why Jesus said the only religion should be to take care of widows and orphans, because they're two of the most vulnerable people in society. Widows, because men tend to prey on them, knowing that they've been recently widowed. And adopted children, because they don't have the guardians to look after them and to go before them. And so now the devil is trying to create under the bandage a wound while camouflaging the bandage as clothing. He's trying to corner the people down the creche when they're children, such that effectively they are as orphans, and effectively the women are as widows, so that now even though the man is alive, the woman is treated as though she is a widow, and even though the mother is alive, the child is treated as though they are an orphan. And so you only have the facade of the family. It functions as a broken home. It functions as though everybody is dead or removed from their role, which is conducive to its well-functioning. And that's Satan. He's trying to strategically infiltrate and implement death functionally within society, while he gives clothing and food to be the bandage over the wound, so that the wound can continue to fester and nobody suspects there is a wound because the bandage looks like clothing. And that's effectively what he's doing. So that we need to restore the mother-baby relationship, so that women are not widows and children are not orphans. And we need to start paying men again, so that women aren't widows and children are not orphans. And it's enshrined under the family unit. In the Irish Constitution it says the government must endeavour to ensure that it never be as a result of economic necessity that a woman leaves the house and goes to work, because we obviously prioritise and know that the woman-child relationship is fundamental to the well-functioning of society, or the common good of any nation. And so the only way to facilitate that relationship is that the man is earning enough to be the breadwinner. And if he's not earning enough to be the breadwinner, the government is utterly failing. And our government in Ireland now are utterly failing even to have the conversation about gainful employment. They're not even bothering to talk about it, because they are Satan's puppets. And he knows that all he has to do to render a household divided and the roles unfulfilled and inept is to fail to pay the father enough, and to neglect to implement what are constitutionally the safeguards that preserve gainful employment for the man, as the implied right and the woman's written right of monetary support for her stay-at-home motherhood. And I mean, traditionally it's worked. It worked for generations, so there's no good reason why it should be abandoned. So they come up with crisis to sort of be the excuse as to why it's happening. And these crises are merely rumoured and orchestrated events which are portrayed or conveyed as having some economic impact, far-reaching impact, which happens to give the appearance that our government shouldn't be blamed because it's out of their control. And this is all fabrication, it's all orchestration. It's the devil doing what he does, and so that his men in government can neglect to uphold or appear to be forgiven in neglecting. They call it impunity, have impunity while neglecting to do what we pay them to do, and what is so essential and so fundamental to the common good and the well-functioning of the society at large. And now what Satan has done is created widowers, widows, and orphans all living under the same roof, which they don't own. And that's happening because Mammy and Daddy have to go to work, baby has to go to creche, and they pet donkeys at the weekend. And they barely know each other. And Satan is laughing up his sleeve because he's going to target those babies down the creche with all of his broken world rhetoric, promoting this, that and the other perversion as to be accepted and tolerated, and even do it yourself if you want children, yeah, it's no problem with it at all. And he's leading them all into the pit of hell while Mammy's at work and not able to defend and protect them, which is naturally her position and her tendency and her want and desire to defend, protect and provide for her children. And that's what sees her at work in the first place. And Satan knows that, and he exploits it. That drive for Mammy to want to see ends met or meeting, and to fill the shortfall of Daddy's income, which should never be the case in the first place, according to the laws of Ireland. So when this government tell you that minimum wage is $12.70, they lie to you barefaced and barefacedly, and they tell you a mistruth. They tell you that $12.70 is minimum wage, the least lawful amount that somebody can be paid, when our constitution says differently. So they're lying to you effectively, and holding you prisoner in your own country under their regime, while they pretend to be democratic and upholding the Constitution of Ireland. They're telling you to presume everything they say or legislate for is constitutional in the absence of even testing it. And that's how corrupt this country has become. They're failing to implement gainful employment, the last economic safeguard against destitution, gainful employment for the man, and failing to implement the Constitution of Ireland under the facade that something can be presumptively constitutional. That's the term they're using. That's what the Court of Appeal said about sections 115 and 117 of the Criminal Justice Act 2006, where guards have been told they can prosecute in court and represent each other's evidence. And we all know that's not true. Guards cannot prosecute in court and they cannot represent each other's evidence, but the Court of Appeal are saying that we should presume that constitutional, whilst they continue to neglect to check it for its constitutionality. I mean, that's just mindless, preposterous. That they would think that that's an excusable course of conduct to pursue. Well, they have pursued it, and they have given that conclusion, and they have committed sedition and treason in this land. And so has the President of Ireland, and so has Miss Justice Siobhan Phelan, who was first tasked in the High Court with testing the same aforementioned sections, 115, 117, Criminal Justice Act 2006. She just point blank said, I didn't do it. Remains an open question. Even though it was number one on the schedule of a court case that came to it, was concluded in her under her precedence, and she didn't meet jurisdiction at all because she abandoned the testing of the constitutionality of something which is something she was tasked with doing, and gave no reason for not doing it. After barristers were employed and paid, both on the side of the state and on the side of the inquirer, which was myself namely, and they didn't fulfil the task. Didn't do it. So we can see that the government of Ireland are conspiring to treason and sedition by attempting to make ineffective the constitution of this land. And if you make a government ineffective, you effectively overthrow it. You effectively nullify its purpose, which is overthrowing it, and that is sedition. So we have people occupying offices within our government on behalf of Freemasonry, which is a satanic synagogue, Rosicrucian in its origin, Knights Templars, all of those satanic orders. Face false Christian crusaders and all of that. Jesus said, love thy enemy, not bludgeon them, unless they convert. And so ultimately you're seeing that these powers are trying to get into government and corrupt them to basically corner the child, because they know the child is the future. And they're not doing it differently to what they've always done. They're just trying to get more access more frequently. And so the best way they could do that was create a facade that the family unit is still the family unit, whilst nullifying effectively what that is. So instead of overtly saying, we're now killing the family, it's effectively what they're doing, by blaming other things for sort of tightening the constraints and the economic, in order to pummel and topple the economic provisions which safeguard the family. And recently in Ireland we voted to keep the woman in the Constitution, and really what that means is gainful employment for the man. But it's like the penny hasn't dropped in people's minds yet. So the government has to satisfy that. It says the government must endeavour to ensure, but they're not even having, the conversation about it. So how can they be endeavouring to ensure gainful employment, especially if they're not even building basic infrastructure like houses and farming isn't being supported? They're actually paying farmers not to farm. So there's a concerted effort on to collapse this country on every level, the family and at basic infrastructure level. They're trying to destroy Ireland, like run it totally into the ground, and people don't even see that. You're not building farms and houses, you can't keep people. And if you're not economically supplying for the family, people can't have children because they can't afford to. And that's effectively what Satan is trying to do, reduce the numbers by making it economically inaccessible and infrastructurally inaccessible. And actually it's the building of basic infrastructure that supplies the jobs that help the country to thrive. Because currency is only a value system anyway. It's only for the transfer of value and measuring the values within society and applying the proper value to them. So now you have people pretending something is worth less than it is or more than it is in order to shift the focus, in order to put the constraints where they want to put them and take the focus off the constraints and place them elsewhere. Like, oh look, everything you buy now is so cheap, don't focus on anything else but how cheap things are. And constantly people are buying these cheap things, not realising that they're reducing the minimum wage by purchasing these really cheap items. Because they're buying into the removal of the labour force by buying these mass-produced products, because there's nothing else available, because they're not producing them by their own hands. So they have to go to the big franchise and the big corporate conglomerate to buy these things which they could easily make for themselves. Not everything, of course. There are things without your accessible tool set or skill set, but they're generally things you don't actually need. So people could be satisfying their needs relatively simply, with a relatively reduced skill set even. I think most people can hammer a nail. They learn not to hit themselves in the thumb after a while, and you can build pretty much everything you need. So, or buy a drill or whatever. But if you didn't have a drill, you could even hammer something together. So generally speaking, people don't have the ability to retain true value systems because they're allowing these big online websites to keep throwing down the price of something. And people think, well, now my minimum wage isn't so little because I can still buy things that I need. Not true. Because you're removing the need for labour, which lowers the minimum wage. But they're not lowering the cost of housing. They're not lowering all the other costs. Just the cost of things you don't really need. So that they've shifted your focus over to things you want, so that you'll neglect things you need, so that they can collapse your infrastructure. They're orchestrating a collapse, and I'm trying to wake you up to it. It's within your power to take back control from a corrupt government. Call a general election and put people in place who will commit to building infrastructure in a timely manner and not allow it to trail off or ebb again, but constantly satisfy that need for infrastructure, because you need the house built before you need to move into it, obviously. So that should be a going concern, and ongoing. Should be a going concern. Is there enough houses? Will there be enough houses? And there should be a constant concerted effort to produce enough infrastructure. And this should be the discussion of the government, the primary discussion. Because the government are failing to build basic infrastructure, which ultimately means the true value systems, or the attributing of a value, the attribution of a value to an item, doesn't reflect the value of that item if it had been built by somebody under the employ of a company. But because the labour force has been removed, replaced by machines, the quality of things is sort of more plasticky, more mass produced, it's of less lasting quality. Like stuff from IKEA is coming out, and the lad will open a drawer and a handle comes off in his hand. I mean, it's badly engineered. But it just goes to show that this stuff is coming out so quickly, and it's, they're prioritising how it looks more, because they're trying to get people to appeal to people. This is the newest thing that I need, or want rather, instead of I'll just build what I need. Or I already have what I need, it just needs to be resanded, refinished, repurposed. And they do that as well, but that's only to take out from you what you already had. They don't want you to have anything in reserve. They want to completely strip you because they're pirates ram raiding and marauding a cave of treasure. They just want to pillage. It's their drive. They're greedy wolves and dogs. They're pigs and vampires. These spirits that operate within these purposefully positioned individuals who have been ordered by the demonic ranks of Freemasonry to neglect to implement true value systems within society and the proper implementation of the constitutions of those different nations, which have been proven to be well functioning for centuries and if not millennia, depending on the country. So their failure to build farms and houses is evident. And there's no reason that they're not doing it, because there's an increased unemployment. There's therefore plenty of available workers that could be trained. There's youths all the time leaving school. They could be trained how to build houses. They could be well paid for so doing. They might even get a house out of it themselves, you know. What an incentive for a young person to build houses in order that they could get one themselves as part of their employment. So, you know, how many men would say no to that? I mean, they have to incentivize these things. They have to properly order them and incentivize them for the workers. And by so doing, you'll attract people to do the job. And they could easily do that if that's what they wanted to do. They don't want to do it. They want to collapse the systems, because they like to put pressure on the nations to twist their arm behind their back, to get them to conform to things and ideals and concepts and principles as part of the acquiring of what should be theirs to begin with anyway, just for being human. So that's what the devil does. He creates these barriers to access and slows down the processes and frustrates the process, so that people get frustrated, and so that people are over a barrel, and people have their arms twisted behind their back, and people are feeling the pinch, when these governments should be removed as soon as they fail to meet their targets. Not afterwards. They've already failed, because it's their job to have these infrastructures built before they're needed, not be making excuses for why they weren't built when they were needed after the fact. So the governments there should be a condition placed that you only retain your seat of office if you meet the requirements of it, and if you don't, you're out. And that would solve the problem, because people want to keep their job and their income at that level. So if you don't meet the needs of the nations, you're out. You only take that seat so long as you're doing the job. That goes for everybody in the workforce. If I was working making sandwiches in Subway and I stopped making sandwiches and sat down and did this, I'd get sacked. Say, sorry, I didn't make those sandwiches today. Why? I got 20 complaints today. There were orders came in for sandwiches and you just sat there with your arms folded making excuses as to why you weren't going to make the sandwiches. And you were blaming everybody else. You're sacked. And that's the realistic expectation put on anybody in employment. Why should the government be any different? If there's the need there for houses and farms, it's not acceptable that the government wouldn't meet the demand. It's fundamental. They're fundamentally useless. So they should be sacked. You wouldn't keep a job in McDonald's if you didn't clean the tables, sitting there making excuses for not cleaning the tables. You're sacked. Get out. Somebody else wants the job who'll do it properly. Get out. You're sacked. You can't have it. Now you're on the dole. You have first-hand experience as to why we need jobs in a timely fashion. Put them, all that government, on the dole for a while and see how they can keep their houses and their cars. Then they'll have first-hand experience of unemployment and they'll be able to talk on it from a base of experience. It's just not acceptable that a government would be paying the farmers not to farm. I'm sorry. You're spending the people's hard-earned taxpayers' dollar on actively preventing basic infrastructure. That's rebuked in Jesus' name. You're paying farmers not to farm. That's called unemployment. If you're paying them not to farm, you're actually giving them a really crappy redundancy package. Like the worst redundancy package ever. It's not acceptable. It's criminal. Has to be rebuked. Government has to be on a performance basis. It has to be. President's telling people not to know their laws and pretend that everything he says is lawful. Sack him. He's supposed to be custodian of the Constitution. Shouldn't be in that seat for a minute longer. He's admitting he's not doing his job. He's admitting it. General election. These people can't keep these well-paid positions if they're not even talking about what they should be doing. Can you imagine? You're setting up organising a committee to plan the development of your soccer club, and all they do is sit around and talk about the birds and don't talk about the need for a locker room and a shower and marking out the pitches on a regular enough basis and keeping them trimmed and irrigating and drainage and draining the land around them. Maybe some sort of seating, if not a stadium, maybe some benches, or just not bothering their Barney to develop it in a timely manner. Buy lads football boots. Everybody's going out trying to play a game of soccer on a winter's day. They're slipping all around the place. And where's the committee to be seen? Another tea drinking committee. So it has to be at the stage where you say, you cannot be in Irish government unless you meet the requirements actively and on an ongoing basis. Sorry, you can't keep your seat. The guy in Subway has to make sandwiches. People come in for lunch. He starts sweating. I'm telling you, he's running. That Subway job has to be respected. That's one of the toughest jobs that I've ever done. And I've chefed in hotels. Because they're not just making the sandwiches, they're running all over the place and back again. They're receiving orders while they're receiving orders of crisps and bottles while they're receiving your order. They're doing it all. That Subway job in Wexford Town's to be respected. They take the mick out of them workers. They're taking the mick out of them. I would say to those workers, leave and get a job in a hotel cooking. You'd be treated better. And paid better. You might have more items to look after and all that, but there's more staff. In that place, they're asking one lad to do the job of 3 or 4 lads, and they're giving out to him when he doesn't do it well. And then you have your government actively paying lads to not do what we need them to do. I mean, come on, lads, wake up. Imagine somebody coming into the guy making sandwiches in Subway and saying, "Here, I'll pay you not to make sandwiches." I mean, when are you going to wake up, guys? Meanwhile, farmers are crying about Aldi won't buy me potatoes. The ones that do bother to grow veggies. Only 1% of farms in Ireland are growing vegetables. And the ones that do bother to grow the veggies start whinging and crying, moaning that Aldi won't buy their veggies. Who cares? Why is Aldi the only place you can sell a few spuds? Have they lost the plot? Farmers cooperate to complain and bitch and moan about the government. Meanwhile, they'll accept the scabby subsistence check instead of holding the government accountable. People talk about the government in this country as though they're immovables. They work for us. Wake up. Sack them. If you don't do your job, then you're just a parasite. Just whinging, bitching, moaning parasites, fighting with each other, blaming each other while they're all sitting around in the shit, failing to do what they're supposed to be doing. It's just unacceptable. They need to be sacked. Whingy, big fat whingy babies that won't do their work. Blaming everybody else, blaming each other. They don't care so long as the work doesn't get done, because that's Satan's game. Neglect to implement. Kick it down the road, blame somebody else, kick it down the road. So what we have to say to them is, guys, you don't meet the requirements, the basic needs of the basic function of government, you're out on your ear. We're not talking about anything fancy here. You're paying farmers not to farm. And allowing big franchises from outside the country rule the roost on who gets access to sell a spud. It's not acceptable, guys. Wake up. Sack them. That's my advice to you. Sack that government, because they're not doing their job, not even basically. Here we are living in a country, and they won't let us forget about the famine. A potato blight. Right? Meanwhile, 1% of farmers are growing vegetables. It's like somebody sat around and said, "I have just the solution to never getting potato blight again. We won't grow any potatoes." It's just stupid. They need to be sacked. It doesn't have to be a big farm. Incentivise a lot of little farmers, little lifestyle farms, a couple of acres, a little plough, a little caterpillar, a little tractor, a little trailer, and a man can make his living from it. And loads of them. Thousands of them all across the country, little farms, and watch the country thrive. Don't need to spend half your life's earning on a big combine harvester or something. Grow a few spuds. We'll all eat them. Grow a few turnips. We'll throw them in the... Grow cabbages. A few new species of cabbage. That'd be lovely. Get a bit of variety in the veggies. Different colour potatoes. Different colour sweet potatoes. A few different types of cabbage. It'd be lovely. Go down to the market and you'll have access to all this fresh food that isn't poisoned with chemicals or heavily modified, plastic looking. And we're not ungrateful for it. It's better than starving, but it could be so much better. Instead of poisoning us along with feeding us. And there are lads who are making the effort. Chemical-free farms. If they can do it, so can everybody. And they're the lads we should be looking to and supporting, because they're making the effort not to poison us. Not telling them Aldi won't buy your stuff because it's not cheap enough. Flip off. Get a few 2x2s and build a shed and put your spuds in some cardboard boxes. Stop whinging and bitching and moaning like little girls' blouses, and do the work. It's like a little kindergarten of grown-ups. Upside down land. It's time you ran the devil and the snakes out of the place. Come on now, ladies. We kept you in the Constitution. It's your time to crack the whip.